Okay, welcome everyone. It is day 2 of NAM, and we are doing more presentations. So this is actually, I think, a very important presentation. It is about um, plugin formats and their open source support for MIDI 2.0. Uh, so, so when we started doing MIDI 2.0 in 2020, we passed the first MIDI 2.0 specifications. And that was the very first step. But there were a couple of issues with doing the first specifications. We had no transport. So there was no way to send MIDI 2.0 between anything because we had no way to send it. So what we did immediately after adopting the specifications is we did the USB MIDI 2.0 transport and put it through the USB IF. So that's a separate process that we had to do. That took about 6 months after we passed it. So that's pretty quick actually in specification world. Mike Kent did that specification. He had also written the USB 1 specification, so he knows USB pretty well. And after we got done with that, well, what's the next step? Well, once you get the USB and happening, and at this show, we're actually showing network. So you can see a demo of MIDI 2.0. And when I say MIDI 2.0, every time I say MIDI 2.0, you have to hear MIDI 2.0, which includes MIDI 1.0, because MIDI is just MIDI 2.0 is just more MIDI. So whenever I say MIDI 2.0, it actually is very inclusive of MIDI 1.0. And then once we did that, well, great. So now we've got a transport. Now we have to get the operating systems. So this is a long process of trying to rebuild the infrastructure that has happened over the last 42 years with MIDI 1.0 and putting that into place for MIDI 2.0. Um, so Apple, Google, Microsoft, Linux, uh, we had a presentation for Pete Brown. He announced that the Microsoft MIDI 2.0 driver, which was paid for by our friends at AME, is going to be in developer open to developers completely in February. So a couple of weeks. That's pretty good. We're moving on. We've done Linux. We've got Google. Apple has had it in their operating system for a long time. So one of the things we wanted to prove is you can have MIDI 2.0 and you can plug in any MIDI 1.0 device and it will continue to work. So if anybody here has a Macintosh computer that is running anything more than Ventura, you already have MIDI 2.0 as the native protocol inside of your operating system. You just don't know it, which is a good thing because all your MIDI 1 devices continue to work. We didn't break anything. So after we get that, then we have to go to the digital audio workstations. There is a version of Cubase has implemented MIDI 2.0, and there is a switch for it. There's a switch for it in Logic as well, because a lot of people don't need it yet because there's not quite as many hardware devices yet on the market as we would like, but they're coming. And so we've got the digital audio workstations, all of the, your Logic, Cubase, Avid is a member, Bitwig is a member. They're all working on their implementations of it. So we have Logic, Cubase, Nuendo, Multitrack Studio. All of those support MIDI 2.0. That's great. So here's the real thing that we started to deal with, which is what do we do about plugins? We understand that the majority of music is made inside of the box. And we also understood that there are thousands of MIDI 2.0, of MIDI developers or plugin developers. So there are, on one side, you've got lots of hardware, then you've got a limited number of DAWs, then over on this side, you've got lots and lots of plugins. And we thought, what is the leverage point? Where is the place where we can have the most impact. And we realized that the place that we can have the most impact is in talking to the four companies that own the plugin formats. And that is VST3, that's audio units, that's Clap for Bitwig, and that's AAX for Avid. And so you can see in this picture, this is a picture from Berlin. We got all of those people. We got people from Apple, Avid, Bitwig, JUCE, Muse, Moog, Multitrack Studio, Native Instruments, Steinberg, and Yamaha. And I often say this, but I will repeat it here again. The MIDI Association has a couple of what I call superpowers. One of our superpowers is we are, I believe, one of the few places on the planet that we can get Apple, Google, and Microsoft to agree on something. But that wasn't difficult enough for us. So then we had to get Logic, Steinberg, Bitwig, and Avid to agree on something. And we did it. So this was a meeting that happened in May. And then, oops, sorry. I want to go back to that one if I can. We had a 3-day meeting in Berlin. And this is an actual hand drawing. You know, this was a working meeting. We would work, we would get in about 8:30 in the morning. We would work until 6 o'clock at night. And then, okay, yeah, it's Berlin. We would drink a little beer and wine, in the evening. But we did an awful lot of work. And what we came up with is a solution to the problem. And the solution to the problem is all of those companies have agreed to develop open source software under an MIT license and make it available for free with no intellectual property encumbrances so that plugin developers can take that code and use it in their plugins. And the reason is we know that plugin developers do not want to have to learn about the intricacies of SysX. We know that plugin developers probably don't want to pay for a SysX ID $250 a year. You won't have to do any of that because the way it will work, and this is a little bit more on actually the DAW control side of things. We decided we would work on two things. We would work on the MIDI-CI helper, and then we would also work on a DAW control profile to replace Mackie control because that's such a fundamental part of the way DAWs work. So this is actually was provided to us by Lucas Hurl. Lucas is one of the head developers for Logic, and this is just a very simple architectural diagram of what the concept of the plugin architecture is. So you've got the plugin native transport, and by the way, you're welcome to take pictures of this. This will be put up. This presentation will be put up on the web soon, and we'll take this information and put it into an article. The MIDI Association is always very transparent. We try to, give people as much information as soon as we possibly can. So this is this is the concept, which is what happens is you have a plugin with its native transport on one side. There's UMP conversion. So what UMP is the universal MIDI packet. So inside of that universal MIDI packet is all of the data about what happens with MIDI 2.0 and MIDI 1.0. And then there's a parser, and that parser, it looks out at an external MIDI device. And on one side, there's a piano, and that piano says, I support the piano profile. And that information, all of the details, it does a profile details inquiry, and it says, great, you support the piano profile. Do you support the CC message for raising the lid? Do you support the CC message for altering the default velocity curve in a different way? So all of these very detailed queries, because what MIDI 2.0 is all about is it's about the two devices talking to each other, which works fine when you have two hardware devices. But when you have a DAW and then a plugin, you need a proxy. You need the DAW to proxy because you can have multiple plugins connected to the DAW and then one piece of hardware. You can have lots of pieces of hardware on this side and lots of plugins on this side. So the DAW works as the proxy, and it extracts that information, passes the information to the actual plugin in its native format. And that's really the point is, as a developer of plugins, what you will have to do is download some code that was written by Logic, Steinberg, Avid, and Bitwig and put it into your plugin, and then you will support MIDI 2.0. And the reason that that works is because the DAW companies are already doing all of the things that really most of the things that we wanted to do with MIDI 2.0 because they're computers. They have massive amounts of memory. They don't have the limitations that we have in hardware, right? And so so I think that that's really important to understand that yes, you will have to do some work to update your plugin to support MIDI 2.0, but most of the work will be done for you by some absolutely incredible engineers who work for Apple and Steinberg and Avid and Bitwig. So this is a little bit more about that structure, which is, your host and your plugin and how that works. So I think you can see the overall architectural thing, and we're going to open it up to questions in a minute, but just wanted to give you that overall architectural picture. I think everybody's good with that. I'm going to move on. I'm going to tell you that the next slide that you will see, you're not supposed to be able to read that, okay? Don't worry about it. This is just to show you that the engineers, obviously, at those companies are working together, and they're talking about all of the details about how this will work. They're talking about what's the threading structure. This is the kind of things that they do very well because that's their job. I'm gonna go off topic just for a little bit and give you another example of something that we're working on. And I didn't get a chance to put the slide in there, but I think it's easy enough to explain. And you can check it out. You can actually check it out over there, because over here on the other side, we have a Windows computer which is running a prototype version of Cubase on the Windows driver, right? We have Logic running on obviously on the Macintosh. And when you go in and you look at those things, they're both running MIDI 2.0. And when you go in right now, they represent MIDI values differently. They made a decision. And one company decided that they were going to represent the maximum value as 127. So in MIDI 1.0, they say 127. And in MIDI 2.0, they say 127. Another company said, we think that the correct way to do it is to represent it as 127 and 127.99999999999 out to the 4 billion values that are in MIDI 2.0. And we all got together and we decided, you know what? Neither one of them are actually correct. There is a minimum value and there is a maximum value and there is a mid value. And so what we are coming out with a recommendation that all of these companies got together and said, no, let's not make it confusing for the end user. And they open Cubase and it says 127.9999, and the other thing, they open it up and the maximum value is 127. The recommendation is that there is, when it's the absolute minimum, it says minimum. When it's the absolute maximum, it says maximum. And that actually, because of the way that the translation is done, anything below the maximum will be 127.786. Better if you use a percentage, because percentages, nobody cares, and it's easy for the end user to understand. But we're going to come out with all of those recommendations. We're also going to say, well, if you're talking about panning, then say center, left, right, and then other values. So again, I know it sounds like a real simple thing to get a bunch of people in a room and get them agree on how to represent things. We're talking about companies that are very competitive in the marketplace. And the fact that they get together and say, you know what, it's going to be confusing for our end users to represent it different ways. Let's work together to do that. I think is a wonderful example of what the MIDI Association does. And it was very funny because we were in Berlin. And of course, if you know the history of it, you know, Steinberg and Logic, which came from eMagic, they have been in Hamburg about 12 miles from each other for the past like 40 years or so. And they actually said at this meeting, this is really cool. Maybe we should get together in Hamburg sometime and talk about this stuff. And I went, yeah, that's probably a good idea. So we're trying to encourage more cooperation between those people. So a little bit about the DAW working group. We meet every week. And I think I said this before. We meet every week. I live in California. Mike Kent, who is the chair of the DAW Control Working Group, where we're trying to replace Mackie Control, he lives in Vancouver. So every Wednesday I get up at 7 a.m. because all of the people who are joining this meeting are in Europe. And so at 7 a.m. we have a meeting. We meet, we talk about these things. We have a lot of people. There are probably in the DAW MIDI-CI helper, we often have between 20 and 25 people in the meeting, so lots of participation from lots of engineers, which is great. We alternate between the MIDI-CI helper and the DAW control profile so that we can continue to make progress. They have already agreed that the results of their efforts will be available available as open source software under an MIT license. For those of you who are not lawyers and never played one on TV or in a movie, it will be available on MIDI 2.0 and all that means to people is actually that it is unencumbered by any intellectual property restrictions. It is the most permissive license that we could find. And the MIDI Association has basically recommended that all open source software that we make is available under an MIT license. Part of that was actually a request that came, I think, from you, Pete, at one point, that you said that the MIT license was something that even Microsoft could tolerate. So that was good. The software is currently available. I mean, we have a GitHub, a private GitHub that the MIDI Association manages. It's a private GitHub, and MIDI Association members have access to that. They can do pull requests, all of the stuff that you would do on a GitHub. The only reason that we do that is we want to make sure that we get it right before it gets released into the wild and we give it out to people. So I got a couple of comments. I'm going to have to turn around to read these. This is from Jan Roper. Jana works for Steinberg. He has been there for many years. He's one of the head MIDI developers, and he said, with the manifold and diverse technologies being present today, it's a continuous challenge to achieve interoperability and understandable concepts that users and developers can master. In the MIDI Association's DAW Working Group, there's a unique opportunity to discuss these challenges and to shape a shared understanding across the involved companies on the future. We at Steinberg really appreciate being a part of this group. We believe it proves beneficial for our customers and for the developers and that are using our technologies like VSD to build it. So it's just a positive statement. Steinberg is actually a little easier to get a statement out of than Apple. Lucas couldn't give us a statement because he couldn't get approval from the PR department because we understand that. this is a statement from George Taylor. He is a plugin developer. He develops Ivory. So he runs the company Synthesis. You can see an actual implementation of the piano profile in back there. You can try it out on both the new Rhodes piano and also on the A88 Mark II. And basically, he's saying the same thing. He's saying this is really great. Everybody's coming together. We're working together to do those things. Uh, and um, and now we're going to open it up for questions. And before you ask me questions, we had a very interesting meeting. The last time we had a meeting, I am not a coder. Okay, I am the evil sales and marketing guy. I was a director of marketing for Yamaha, and and all the engineers laughed and they said, "You're the perfect person to do the presentation because when they ask you a question, you can say without lying, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a developer." But I am happy to try to answer any questions if somebody has one. And so I will I will thank you, Mr. Zhao. Yeah. And so if anybody does have a question, I'm happy to try and answer it to the best of my ability. Questions? Who? Let me ask a question of you. Raise your hand if you're a plugin developer. Okay. Got questions?
One. So I work at FSK Audio. We are a member of the MIDI 2 Association group. Who do we talk to about getting access to the private repo? So check that out.
I would actually talk to Andrew Me because he runs the GitHub, and I think you know Andrew. And yes, any MIDI Association member, any AME member you can do pull requests, you can see all the stuff, and like they're doing really good work. I mean, you'll see it. So,
Thank you.
yep. Any other questions? The rest of the people here, raise your hand if you're a musician who uses a computer to write music. Okay. So we're working really hard to make it easier for you. And when I always said this when I was working at Yamaha, making it easy is really difficult, which sounds like a bizarre thing, but we are actually making developers do a lot of work to make it easier for you to make music, and that's what we think is warranted right now. So I think with that, so there's no more questions. We're going to end our presentation. Thank you very much for showing up.